Hi, previously we've created an app that lets us upload and download files from AWS using signed URLs. In this video, we will continue working with the simple storage service and see how we can enable and use bucket versioning. We'll add an update feature for existing documents, view and download previous versions, and handle delete markers. So let's get started. First off, I'm gonna add versioning to my bucket and deploy the changes. If we look in the console, we can see that version ID is null for existing documents, but once I upload a new file, it has a normal version ID. So this is one thing to keep in mind when enabling versioning for buckets that are not empty. Moving on, we're gonna need a form for updating existing documents. I'm gonna display it in a model and create a new update form action. This is a very similar setup to the previous form. Let's also create a button that will open up this model. We're just going to assign the selected document to a variable and bind it to model's prop. And I'm just going to log the payload in the update action to see what happens. Okay, I'm getting the file. Let's add a key field, and then same as before, we will remove the file from form data as we only want to send it to AWS, nowhere else. Now in the update action, we can use the name and key to create a signed URL and then use it in the submit handler to upload the file to S3. This was covered in more detail in the previous video. It's time to test if it actually works. Okay, so as you can see, we got a new version in AWS console. So now if I go back and download it, I should get a different image. And I do, and it has the new file name as well. So now let's write a quick SQL for updating a document by ID so that we can display the correct name. I'm gonna define an endpoint which will use that SQL and write a function for sending the request. I don't want to send the request if I don't have to, so I'm gonna check if the name changed before sending the request, and I'm gonna pre-populate the field with current value. Let's see if it works. Okay, so now let's see how we can display the previous versions. I'm gonna send a list object versions command pointing to a bucket and using object key as its prefix. If we had nested objects, we could use those quote-unquote folder names in the prefix as well. I'm using a ZOT validator here to normalize the data a little bit and then create an endpoint for getting the version list. All we really need is document ID. We can then get the document from the database which stores its key. Now in the UI, I'm gonna use Sveitz's reactivity to call the endpoint when the model window is open. Let's check it out. As you can see, I've already uploaded a few versions and I'm getting a key, a date, a version ID, and a isLatest boolean value. We can now use this data to show a list. Okay, we got the list, so let's now update our download logic to account for different version IDs. First, we're gonna add version ID to the URL search params. Then we need to use that version ID in the endpoint. And last but not least, we're gonna use it in the getObject command when generating a signed URL. I'm gonna add an onClick event and test it. It works great, so one last thing is to enable removing documents, which can be a little bit strange when you have versions because a deleted document is still a version of some kind. AWS handles this by creating delete markers. So let's implement it. We need to send the delete object command. We just need to point to an object in a bucket and then AWS handles the rest for us. Now we can create a delete endpoint which will send the request to AWS. If we leave it like this, it will work, but we have no way of indicating that a document was deleted in the UI. So I'm gonna add a deleted column to the DB table and write an SQL that will set that column to true. And then updating will set it to false. We can add this to the delete endpoint and update the document validator, otherwise it will fail validation. Terso actually uses ones and zeros for boolean values, so we can transform it into a boolean as well. Going back to UI now, I'm gonna create a remove button and call that endpoint. Okay, I have a delete marker and 4 other versions of this object, but in the UI I actually have only 4 versions total. There is no latest version displayed because it would be green, and if I download the top version, it will still download the file. That's because the list versions command returns versions and delete markers in separate properties. So let's deal with that. I'm actually gonna add a deleted property to delete markers to keep track of them when we merge the arrays and then sort them newest to oldest. We also have to update the ZOD validator to account for the deleted prop, and we can coerce it into a boolean value for those that do not have it set. Let's see if we have all versions showing up now. It does show up, and if I try to download it, it shows me that it's a delete marker. So that's it. To sum up, we've added versioning to our AWS bucket to keep track of changing objects in S3. We were able to upload new versions by using existing objects key when generating the upload URL, and used version ID for download URLs to allow downloading specific versions. Last but not least, we implemented delete markers and displayed them in a list with other versions. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching.